who do not know Mary, Mary is my wife. Thank you. So let's go there straight because of time. I see it's nearly 7. So we were hoping that we would only take about 30 minutes. So hopefully by 7:30 we should be done. Did I say my name is Joseph Ngahu? Just in case I forgot, sorry about that. And I was asked by the office to uh, make a presentation about now that finance bill fell or was rejected, then what next? And I actually thought that it's quite an opportune item because it's really the biggest public interest debate that is currently in our country. And the finance bill, as we know it, finance bill is all about taxes, largely, right? It's all about taxes. It's the bill that comes every year to guide the government on how it's going to raise the necessary resources to take the government through the whole financial year. And as we know, the financial year for the government runs from July through June of the following year. So then, being then about taxes, then we may also need to see, like, what did our Lord Jesus Christ say about taxes? And I think the book of Matthew is really becoming hardy for JPRC this year. But that's also where our patron has gotten his text from. But also from Matthew 22, verse 17, going all the way to from Matthew 22, verse 17, going all the way to verse 21, Jesus actually talked about taxes. And we find that this is when the Pharisees, with their evil mind, trying to trap Jesus, to test him about his wisdom and knowledge, asked him whether they should pay taxes. And then there in on verse 18, Jesus, knowing the Pharisees' evil intent, asked them, "Why are you trapping me?" So he went ahead to ask them to show him a coin, which they normally used. And they brought him what is called a denarius. So, and he asked them, "Whose portrait is this? And whose inscription is on the coin?" To which they replied that it was Caesar's. So then he told them, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's," essentially settling that issue that taxes, of course, must be paid to the current authority. Yeah, so when it comes to our government, it has only 3 major sources of resources, right? And those are largely the taxes, debt, that is borrowed funds, and grants. So grants also could include all the donations, whether in kind or in monetary terms. But those are the 3 main sources of resources where our government gets the necessary resources to run the country. So we'll actually be focusing on taxes and probably quite to an extent on debt, because debt has also become quite a critical issue, especially of late. And the Kenya government has actually a national tax policy. They have a national tax policy which actually guides the whole aspect of taxation. It was prepared in 2018 and actually tabled in Parliament as a sessional paper in 2023. And it actually is the main objectives of taxation in Kenya. But the main one, of course, is to raise revenue for provision of goods and services. So all those public goods and services that we expect the government to provide, be it education, be it healthcare, be it the national and local infrastructure, all those can only be funded through taxes. There are other non-revenue objectives, say like income distribution. Taxation is also used to distribute incomes between various groups, especially when you think about those who have more and those who have less. It's one tool which, if applied well, can actually assist bring up the lower classes of the society, of course, while those who have more pay a little more. Okay? It can also be used to regulate the consumption of particular goods and services, especially those goods and services which have some negative outcomes. So here you would have in mind about the alcohol, the tobacco, and the like, right? And this is actually what we have seen, that every finance bill tries to raise taxes or even to increase the current taxes charged on those products. Largely not necessarily just to raise funds, but also to discourage consumption of some of these products. So as a church, and I want us to be a little interactive, I don't want it to be a little, and to be quite monologue. So as a church then, why shouldn't the government probably like double or triple the taxes on beer and on cigarettes? Or even make it like 10 times or just whatever. Why not? Why would the government not do that? Of course, the government looks at a lot of factors and a lot of issues, not only on revenue, but again, on a lot of other issues. Like when you talk of beer, much as the church would not advocate for people to take beer, but it is common knowledge that the whole industry supports a lot of people. When you think of the berry farmers, and all those who are in that value chain, be it the farmers, be it the employees, whoever. I mean, it creates a lot of wealth across different groups. So the government has to balance, right? The same case with the tobacco, all those who grow the crop, the transporters and the like. So the government has to balance between reducing the demand for these products, while at the same time safeguarding the livelihoods of those who depend on those products as their, say, cash crops. Others include employment creation, price stability, or the promotion of economic development through provision of incentives. So the policy also sets the common principles or the guidelines which should be followed in when these taxes are formulated or put in place. And one is that every tax should have should promote equity and fairness. There should not be any one tax which perpetuates inequity or unfairness on any one segment of the population, right? So we talk of two sets of equities. One, the horizontal equity, meaning across all the people of similar circumstances, right? So say a particular tax should affect teachers, all the teachers equally, but say not to disadvantage some teachers of a particular locality, while say promoting teachers of another locality. So because teachers are of the same, in the same circumstances, say across the country, then whatever tax that say is about to affect teachers should affect all teachers equitably. And also the vertical vertical equity, right? So those who have more then should suffer a little more. Those who have less should suffer a little less. And this is probably why this particular bill raised a lot of hue and cry, right? The very first proposals which came out and which the population was really, really against, if you can remember, it was the proposal to tax value added, to put VAT on bread, right? Bread is a universal food item, and it was felt that now that was the worst form of taxation. Because even who uses most bread? Who really relies on bread? Is it the rich or the poor? The who? Omokami, the who?
Poor.
The poor. Who really uses bread a lot? Is it the rich or the poor? Yeah, it's a cross, but the poor largely actually rely on bread, yeah? Bread is no longer a luxury like a few decades ago. Bread is consumed in big quantities, say, by the youth. When now you come to segment other populations, youth consume a lot of bread, be they in lower school, in middle school, or even in colleges. You may know that with the particular hard economic times, a lot of university students actually rely on bread. So you can see the opposition that particular cross brought when it was put there. One particular member of parliament, who has become very vocal, although she actually belongs to the ruling party, said that that particular clause was put with the purpose to actually divert the whole debate towards bread, so that when it would be finally removed, all the other clauses would actually pass. I don't know how true or how false that was, but of course with the big opposition it was finally removed. But I think the point to note that even after it was removed, I think the damage had already been done. Yeah, the whole bill had been seen to be totally anti-population. Okay. Another major key principle that I wanted to mention is simplicity, right? Tax laws and administrative processes should be clear and easy to comply and not so difficult to evade. But what is also coming out is that some of these tax proposals that are coming are actually, they are not quite easy to implement. And I want to share with you about the requirement for e-TIMS, the electronic tax invoice management system, which actually requires that all traders actually raise an e-TIMS invoice, yeah? Because a requirement was put that you'll not be able next year to claim any cost if that cost was not supported by an e-TIMS generated invoice. While it may be quite easy for established businesses and companies to do some of these things, you can imagine it's quite difficult for a small trader who is operating out here, a small shop or a small boutique or any other small whatever, for him or her to be required to raise an e-TIMS invoice for each and every sale that they make. Not even about the cost that will be added, but even the difficulty of that person even understanding and being able to comply with that particular whatever. So as much as possible, taxes should be quite simple to comply with. Okay? I will not go through all the principles because of course of time, but they should also be consultative. Every tax before it's implemented should follow a very consultative process. And I guess this is grounded also from our principle from the Constitution requiring public participation in every key decision that affects the people. So every new tax should gather maximum support from the population. But what have we found out in the last few years, especially coming from last year? Yeah? When affordable housing levy was introduced last year with the Finance Bill 2023. What came out and what people were really a little uncomfortable this year was that despite the intensive public participation, which totally was against the housing levy, it was actually pushed through and it became law. Yeah. So you may remember that when this, now the current finance bill, which was rejected, was going through the motions, people were very worried that even though they were being assured that their views would be taken into account, they were very fearful that it was just a formality, because they were quoting last year, right? That if you are asking us for our opinions, for our input, but at the end of the day, you are not going to whatever. So even though this time it appears that a lot of the sentiments, the public sentiments, were actually considered. So what law guides taxation in Kenya? There are several laws that guide the taxation in Kenya. And of course, the primary law is the Constitution. So Constitution actually lays out the principle of taxation. So Constitution, specifically chapter 209 or article 209, gives the government the power to impose taxes and charges, and then splits up what taxes are imposed by the national government and which ones are imposed by the county governments. So the national government is it's the only body and empowered by the Constitution to charge income tax, value-added tax, custom duties, and the excise tax. Okay, while counties are only allowed to charge, say, property rates, entertainment taxes, and any other tax that is authorized by an act of parliament. So you can see the Constitution clearly delineates the responsibilities for taxation between the two levels of government, so that there is no ambiguity as to who should levy what tax. Of course, other laws include now the Income Tax Act, originally enacted in 1973, but it has every year been revised with some changes. The VAT Act of 2013. The import duty is largely governed by the East African Community Customs Management Act. Yeah, so you see, since the revival of East African Community some years ago, some of these rates are actually harmonized across the region, okay? Especially to do with regard to import duties. The excise duty, which is imposed on local manufacture and importation of some commodities and services, is grounded on the Excise Duty Act of 2015. There is also the Tax Procedure Act. This largely sets the mechanisms of how tax administration is to be done. And also, of course, there is the Public Finance Management Act of 2012, which lays the ground on how public financial management ought to be carried out. And as I said earlier, although it's not a law, but there is the tax policy in place. And by the way, you may note any question you may have, then probably at the end we can try and respond. Yeah, so then let's talk now, let's come proper to the Finance Bill 2024. And I wanted to share with you like the background or the environment around which the bill was introduced, right? As I have said, the Finance Bill 2023, against a great opposition, effected such taxes or levies like the housing levy. It's also what gave rise to a higher pay. Those who are formerly employed know, especially those who are on the higher income brackets. Other laws gave the higher NHIF rates, higher NSSF rates. So generally over the last 2 years, taxes and the rates have actually been going up. It has also come against the background of sustained high cost of living, right from the days of Corona, coming to the high fuel prices. The cost of living has remained high relatively, even though, say, recently the food prices have come down. Another critical consideration during this period when Finance Bill was coming up was the issues of graft or corruption, right? There was a pronounced feeling that there was a lot of graft within government, right? Whether you are talking about allegations touching on fuel, graft around the fuel, you remember the G2G, the government-to-government procurement of fuel. There was perception that there was a lot of graft around that procurement. Also, there was the allegations of graft around the edible oil, the cooking oil. There was a concern about corruption around the issue of fertilizer, the fake fertilizer. There was even local concerns about, say, the education scandals, the Ngahu scholarship scandal, you remember? Yeah. Now, that has really defined the environment, the earlier part of this year, and that is when this finance bill was coming. Of course, the issue of politics, there have been a lot of concerns about the current politics, the state of opposition, whether we have any opposition. Then there was a major concern that our government is living large. The government is really expensive. It's living large. And they are not only living large, but they are actually showing it off, okay? There was concern that CSs are really showing off, yeah? They are showing everyone who cares to see that they are in money. And yet the government and the president is saying that we really need to live within our means. It was also not lost on the population that the president himself was always on the move, right? Yeah, he was always airborne. So his travel has really been, was really quite an issue. On labor relations, yeah, there have been strikes by medical workers, you remember, the doctors, the clinicians, the lab technologists, a whole host of health workers were on strike early this year, largely asking for their benefits or their contracts to adhere to their CBAs. Teachers were also on strike. You remember the JPRC, the junior secondary school teachers, agitating for permanent and pensionable terms. And of course, now there was the big issue about IMF, right? The International Monetary Fund. There is a widespread belief, and it has not been denied, that Finance Bill 2024 was made with a huge input from IMF, right? In fact, it said that the staff, the IMF staff, actually participated in drafting this, whatever, to an extent where people allege that they even attended the budget reading session in Parliament. I don't know whether that was just meant for them to ensure that what they put in has actually been factored in. So there has been a big debate about the impact of IMF conditions in a country, especially with regard to taxes. And if you want to read further, ActionAid, which is one of the leading organizations which look at such issues, actually released a report, I think last year, detailing the IMF's operations like for the last 50 years. And what they came to note was that IMF insists on austerity, that is cost cutting, cost cutting on our government, despite the evidence that that cost cutting actually stifles our economic development and human development, especially in Africa. Those who are a little, those who went through education a little while ago, and I can see, I think all of us here, none of us here is a Gen Z. Yeah, all of us went through those earlier years. You remember when IMF put in very stringent conditions around the 80s, 90s, yeah? And that is when, say, universities started asking students to pay, okay? That is when there was a long-term freeze of employing teachers and employing a lot of government staff, right? It was during those days of what they called the structural adjustment programs, the SAPs, that Kenya really went through a difficult period. Of course, with the successive presidents, I think when Kibaki came, he really tried to shake the country off from IMF. And he actually succeeded to a big extent, isn't it? Yeah, he actually reported to have financed his budget 95% with the local resources. And even when he had to look for extra resources, he actually went east. He looked east to China and those eastern countries. I think he had a vision to really shake off the country from the conditions of IMF and the sister institution of World Bank. Okay. Yeah, so that's the environment against which now this bill came. And of course, now you know what actually happened when the bill was debated. We went through public participation. Of course, when it went to Parliament for the passing, some of the very controversial clauses were actually dropped. So the issue of tax on bread was dropped, and a few others. So then let's, for the sake of time, now shortly look at, so the whole topic was what next? Apart from the legal aspects which Wakili can confirm about now the president failing to assent the bill and sending it back to Parliament, of course our expectation is that Parliament is going to agree with him, so they are going to recall the whole bill, and that will be the end of that particular bill. But then what next? The simple answer is that the government will go on, so the government will not stop. But one just wishes it was that simple, that we are going to go on. Of course, the primary laws are still there. Those acts which govern the collection of taxes are still there. The ones I mentioned earlier, the Income Tax, the VAT Act, the Excise Duty Act, and all those, they are still there. And also the Finance Bill 2023 is still effective. The way the amendments to those laws are still effective. So government continues to run on the law as was changed by Finance Act 2023. It's only that all those proposals which were contained in the Finance Act 2024 will not apply, okay? And by the way, Also, this Finance Bill 2024 had some of positive changes. But of course, now when the bill is rejected, it's rejected in total. So there were quite some positive proposals, but of course then they will not be affected. Like with the pensioners, say it had proposed that now those receiving pensions would no longer pay tax. It had also increased to say the rates of per diems for those who are working, and they are paid per diems, the threshold against which they ought to pay tax, and a few other whatever, but in total it was rejected. So so what really now will happen? Of course, with regard to the budget and the economy at large, is that certainly the budget deficit has increased, okay? Because this bill was anticipated to raise 344 billion Kenya shillings. Finance bill, those particular proposals which were on the Finance Bill 2024 were supposed to raise an additional 344 billion Kenya shillings. And this is part of the money which was to finance the budget, which was read, and the total budget was 3,992 billion, nearly 4 trillion Kenya shillings. So you are saying the financing 344 billion worth of expenditure then cannot be financed. That's what it would mean. So now the biggest challenge to the government is to see how to fix in this deficit. The deficit is simply the gap between what you aspire to spend and what resources you have, okay? So the biggest headache now for the government is to see how to plug this deficit. So what it will do is that it will do it from the two sides. One, it's going to cut on expenditure, because if you do not have money, even at individual level, then you just cut your expenditure, right? And you live within your means. So it's going to cut the expenditure, but also probably borrow more, okay? So there will be cutting of expenditure and also borrowing more money. Remember, even with the original budget which factored in the Finance Bill 2024, there was already a deficit of 587 billion Kenya shillings. So the government had planned on how they were to raise that deficit. But now, with this Finance Bill not going through, the deficit only increased. And actually, the minute it was not assented to or returned back, the deficit then would have shot to 943 billion Kenya shillings, nearly 1 trillion. And this is the figure. You remember the press conference when the president said he was declining to sign the bill. He actually said, then as a result, the government may have to borrow up to 1 trillion Kenya shillings. That's what he said in the original press conference when he declined to sign the bill, because that was the direct whatever. But of course, later on, they had to relook also at the expenditure. And actually, as we speak, they have the National Treasury has prepared a supplementary budget, revising the expenditure down, and actually submitted it to the National Assembly for consideration. But the supplementary budget has only reduced expenditure by, I think, about 122 billion Kenya shillings, meaning that the budget deficit has still grown. So what will most likely happen with regard to taxes? We are likely to see a more aggressive KRA, Kenya Revenue Authority, correcting the normal taxes as they exist in the law. Because now the pressure is even more to fund this budget with the existing law which was put in 2023. So we are likely to see a more aggressive correction effort. So the task for us and for our population is to make sure that they are compliant as much as possible. You remember right from last year, KRA had already hired a huge army of revenue assistants who had actually come down, even down to the very local shops, trying to establish the business data with a view to increasing the tax correction. So we anticipate that this year is even going to be much more stronger and more aggressive. So there'll be enhanced efforts to ensure that all traders comply with the e-TIMS requirement. So also you as a businessman or as a trader, ensure that you are aware about these requirements so that you'll not be on the wrong side of the law when the law catches up. So they are going to enhance the efforts around the tax recoveries, enhance the efforts around anti-counterfeit, making sure that all goods coming in pay their fair share of taxes. So the effect of that is that certainly there'll be increased cost of doing business, yeah, because people have to comply, people have to hire the expertise and all that to make sure that they comply. Ensure your returns are made up to date, because then we anticipate that even the waiver which the authority has been giving on penalties and interest against unpaid tax, now they may hesitate to give those waivers because they'll be really after every shilling. So ensure you are really compliant. But it is also thought that the government may actually, especially once this environment has ceased, especially once the politics have been fixed. I don't know if they are talking of a government of national unity and all that. But once, say, the demos disappear and some normalcy returns, some people are actually thinking that the government could still bring some tax amendment laws to try and effect some of those measures which they had anticipated in the finance bill that was rejected. Also, they'll be trying to ensure that they have minimized on tax exemptions, the preferential tax rates, and waivers, as I've said. But the worst one is where people anticipate that there is going to be an introduction or enhancement of already existing levies and user charges, right? There is a well-founded fear that there is going to be introduction of new levies, higher levies on those which exist. And just this week, how much did the fuel fall by in the last announcement? Either 14th, either last week. Was it last week or this week? It fell by, petrol fell by like 1 shilling, diesel 1 shilling and 50 cents, right? But what also came out from that announcement is that the government had increased the road whatever maintenance levy by a whole 8 shillings, okay? From 18 shillings to 25 shillings. And that actually became very controversial, because even the outgoing minister had actually said that after the public participation, they were not going to increase the road levy to hurt the people. But it actually came, during the announcement on 14th of July, it came out that they had already increased the fuel levy by a whole 8 shillings to 25 shillings per liter. So what does it mean? It means that actually the drop in the fuel prices would have been much higher by at least that 8 shillings, now added to the rate that it was reduced, okay? So this is a real fear, and unfortunately, probably we are going to see more of that. So it is also up to the citizenry to really keep a watch And I think here we will entrust our Gen Zs to keep up the lookout and the pressure to make sure that such whatever do not come through what may reasonably be called a backdoor, right? Now, leaving taxes and now looking at the issue of borrowing, of course, taxes will never be raised to an extent where they will cover the whole budget. So we also anticipate that there is going to be higher borrowing than even originally anticipated. Also because, remember that taxes, KRA, the Revenue Authority, never achieves 100% of their targets. Like now, the year which ended in June, they are only reported to have, I think, realized 95%. So whatever shortfall they get in their targets, again, has to be covered through borrowing, okay? And the government borrows largely from two sources or two areas. So the government borrows locally, that is internally within the country, and it also borrows externally. And that external borrowing is where IMF and all those readers really come into play. So we'll probably see the government trying to borrow more locally. And one of the biggest problems that this government has had is that from the election time, they really promised the population that they were to stop borrowing. Okay? That has really been a mantra, and that has been a repeated statement that this government is not going to borrow. But probably it is high time that the government came clean and actually admitted that it cannot run without borrowing. Okay? Because, truth be told, there are very few governments in the world which run without borrowing. Even the mighty US has a huge debt, a big portion of which is taken up by China. So it is probably time when we also told our masses the truth that the government must continue borrowing. Of essence, the government borrows every week, for those who are not aware. Every week, because it borrows through central bank. Central bank raises what are called the treasuries, the treasury board and the treasury bills. The treasury bills are the shorter term papers, yeah, going for 91 days, 182 days, and 364 days, which is basically 1 year. The bonds are the longer term, starting, say, from 3 years going upwards even to 20 years. So the government continuously borrows because the government borrowed in the past, so they must continue borrowing, one, to repay the old debt, but also to manage the current budget. So we anticipate that there is going to be increased borrowing to meet this deficit. Now, what is the effect or the implication of higher borrowing? Of course, then you anticipate that interest rates will rise, yeah, because there is a big challenge when government borrows more than is necessary. In that, the local financial institutions, largely the banks, prefer to lend to the government as opposed to you as an individual because of the risk aspect, right? Governments world over are thought to be relatively risk-free in their borrowing. That largely the government is thought that it will never default on its borrowing. That when time comes to pay, they will pay, okay? But you as an individual or as a company, your risk of default is much higher. So what happens is that when government has a higher appetite to borrow, the banks would rather raid the government and reduce the borrowing available to the corporate citizens, okay? And hence, now you find that even if you are to actually get that loan, then get it at a much higher rate than would have been the normal case. Like now, what's the current bank rates operating right now? Who has taken a loan recently? You may not tell us the amount, but the rate. how much? 21. Okay, 22%. Okay, 21, 22%. And remember, those rates were actually below 20% just a few months ago. So they have actually been going up. Okay, so even you'll not be surprised that for some segments of borrowers, the rates could even be as high as 26, 27, 28. So it will become much more expensive for individual private citizens to borrow. Okay, and now in turn, what that leads to even lower economic growth, because what were you borrowing for, right? You are not borrowing for consumption. You are probably borrowing to buy some equipment, to start a business, to do something. So the minute you do not get that credit, then it means that there is lower economic growth, because it's from those ventures that you are borrowing for, which would have contributed to economic growth. So also when the rates go high, there is also a higher chance of default, loan default, okay? As the rates rise, so do the loan defaults rise. And banks are especially affected by these loan defaults, which again works to lower revenue to government. Because remember, these banks also pay taxes on their profit. So it's actually a vicious cycle, which will actually continue affecting the country negatively. On the external side, and this is where borrowing externally, and this is where it's actually going to be a little tricky, because if indeed these conditions were actually, a lot of them had the blessings of IMF and those other creditors, the fact that they did not go through is then portraying the country as not being able to raise the necessary resources internally to sustain the debt. Okay? And remember, IMF may not be the biggest creditor. Actually, they are not. They are not the biggest creditor to the government. But the perception that the country is in good books with IMF is quite beneficial to the country. It is what other creditors look when they are determining the terms and conditions on which they are to lend to the country. So, and that is why you find it is actually very difficult for the country to operate without IMF's blessings to an extent. Just immediately after the finance bill was rejected, IMF actually postponed a review meeting, which they were to review, I think, the next tranche of lending to Kenya. So I think it was just deferred, as probably as they tried to think through, like, what it meant that this bill had not gone through. Okay. Also, when largely also because of the bill, Kenya has been rated lower in terms of international credit rating. There are those international credit rating agencies which creditors rely on to judge the relative risk of a particular country when they advance their credit. And one major one, called Moody's, actually cut Kenya's rating from a level they call B3 to CAA1, which is a lower rating. Come to think of those ratings as the CRB, the local CRB, right? You know how they rate you as a borrower. Yeah. So at the international level, the country is also rated pretty much the same way. You as an individual borrower here is rated by CRB. So, of course, we anticipate to see more stringent controls from lenders like IMF. Also that may lead to higher interest rates, especially if the government is not able to get those concessionary loans from IMF, and the government is forced to borrow from, say, the commercial lenders, those international banks and the like. The rates will certainly be higher, which may also lead to depreciation of the local shilling against those international currencies. And the effects will be that, of course, there'll be higher debt burden. And if, again, we are not able to borrow to the anticipated levels, then it also means that the country will not have enough resources to provide all the public goods as had been planned. And you have already seen that the government has already started scaling down on some of the expenditure items that they had put in the budget, right? Yeah, so it is going to be a little tough, especially for the development budget. When resources are scarce, the very first budget line that serves is the budget line for development. So we probably anticipate that it's going to be cut substantially, and that now may lead to, say, pending bills continuing or even increasing. It was anticipated that this financial year, a lot of the pending bills, which have really been pending for a long time, would substantially be paid, but now we don't think that will substantially change. Also then it will also lead to, say, lower development than earlier planned. And then we likely to see delayed completion of even current projects that are running. And you pretty well know even particular projects which already have either stalled or they are totally delayed. What happened to that road going from Thika to Nyeri? That dueling that Thika, kunaitwaje watu wa Nyeri hapo inaishia panaitwaje Chaka ama panaitwaje Marwa hiyo barabara. That road is not complete, but it has largely stalled, okay, and it's all because of resources. So we also hear the Mau Mau roads have also largely stalled. So it's quite a challenge when the government does not get development funds. There were plans to do the Rironi, Mau Summit roads and all those other major infrastructure, whatever. And also, we also need to look at the repercussions, even in terms of employment. These programs, these projects offer employment, especially even to the vulnerable groups like the youth, right? So when they are not happening, then you are also meaning that there is lower employment to the population, okay? Budget cuts on the recurrent budget lines. Recurrent budget is largely to do with the salaries, operations and maintenance, right? We are likely to see lower public sector employment. As a matter of fact, was it this week? SRC already has frozen any recruitment in government, right? Yeah, they have also frozen any promotions which were due in government. So they are serious, and they are serious repercussions, and they already whatever. We're also going to see, say, lower funding for critical sectors like education and health. So it's very tricky, especially, say, with particular groups like university students who are already grappling with reduced help loans, then, say, the junior secondary, and actually across the entire education chain. Yeah. Also health, the issue of interns is still unresolved, and with these budget cuts, it's actually not going to be easy to address those issues. So, and the effects will be, as I said, increased unemployment, lower disposable income, because remember, these people who are employed actually support the population, right? Like one person employed by government, you can say with a lot of certainty that that person probably supports at least, say, 5 people, right? So when, say, this person is not employed, or when they do not get any raise, then essentially in the population you are talking of, less disposable income. That also leads to lower demand for goods and services as a result of lower incomes. Now, effects on underfunding in education and health inevitably leads to lower quality of life. Because what you are saying is that that hospital does not get enough medication or even human resource. So essentially the population will endure lower quality of life. But the worst case scenario is that it may actually lead to social and labor and these periodic strikes and the like. Yeah, so those are the main direct considerations around the budget and the economy. But on the political side, probably we are likely to see different segments of the population demanding and continuing to demand their rightful share of the scarce resources. As we say, the workers, e.g. the teachers, health workers, the students, the pensioners. Remember how there has already been such a big complaint that pensioners are taking extremely long time to get their dues, right? So we hope that it's not going to get worse. Political formations, say the political parties, the coalitions, will likely exploit these current uncertainties to position themselves, as we can already see right now. Then we don't know whether there will be new political formations like the much talked government of national unity or broad-based government. On the social side, again, we anticipate to see increased demands for accountability for public funds and expenditure, which is a good thing, what agencies are doing. Yeah, government really needs to be very transparent, and public officials need to be kept on toes for accountability of how they spend these scarce resources. Okay, so we are likely to see increased agitation for accountability by diverse groups, such as political parties, both the minority as well as majority. We really hope that from this point onwards, even the majority party members are really going to be very keen to look at what they debate and what they pass, yeah? And probably it's not just going to be business as usual, like the way they have probably in the past just been whipped to adopt a particular proposal, and they just go ahead with it. We really hope that now the parliament can restore its independence and really critically look at the proposals and act for the best interest of the country. Civil society, trade unions, and the general public, led by our Gen Z. So what are likely to be the trickle-down effects on the counties? We have already seen counties being put on notice, right? Yeah, that now that we are through, or even as we focus on the national government, we also need to focus on the counties. Because unfortunately, and truth be told, counties have become bastions of corruption, right? Yeah, this is where a lot of resources are getting wasted. And then now the Auditor General's reports, every year reports millions and millions of shillings which cannot be accounted for in those entities. How is this going to affect the family unit? Yeah? How is this agitation for transparency and accountability likely to to affect family units. So you as the family head, you may find yourself being under more scrutiny on how you utilize the family resources, right? Yeah, because now agencies have taken it up now from the national level down. So they finally come to you, Wanawamukami. Yeah, yes. So that proposal that you want to invest significant family resources in, you'll be asked to justify and show why it should not go to some other cause. Also, you may also need to adopt public participation right within your household to make sure that at least there is peace and harmony and there is the necessary buy-in in whatever decision that you take. Thank you very much for listening to me, and we can respond to some questions. Thank you. Sorry, time has really gone. I've exceeded my 30 minutes. Sorry about that.
Sit here, the hot seat. Thank you very much, Joseph, for that elaborate talk. Yeah? I think we are becoming more enlightened. For those who still do not believe that the Gen Zs should be still on the street, you have a more reason to do so. It seems life is becoming even harder. Might be even harder, even after the rejection of the finance bill. And a question